We're taking a look at the NHL players who are long in the tooth. How have they managed to stick around 20 or more years? Does anyone else have a chance to reach that mark? All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. I'm Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here each and every Friday with Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Gil, how are we doing this Friday?
We are doing well. The week flew by, and we are creeping closer and closer to training camp.
We are. It cannot get here soon enough, in my opinion. It's already starting to get dark a little bit sooner, so it means that it is around the corner. And not afraid to say this, Gil, but you and I are a couple of old folks in the grand scheme of things. I feel like I was holding on to Jaromir Jagr continuing to play hockey as somebody who was older than me, still playing pro hockey. And he still may be that guy, but
he's playing somewhere.
Yeah. Unfortunately, now I feel like I could be the mom to some of these players in the NHL these days. But the Hockey News did a really interesting article about 4 players who are hitting their 20th season this upcoming season. And it was really interesting. We thought we'd take a look at who's stuck around the longest of the active players, who those guys are hitting the 20-year mark, and, who could potentially hit that milestone down the road. First off, do have to mention there are a couple of guys who are ahead of the 4 who have 20 years under their belt already. They'll be entering their 21st seasons, and that's Brent Burns and Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah, guys who have been around for more than 2 decades in the NHL. I still remember seeing Marc-Andre Fleury play a game at the Nassau Coliseum during the NHL lockout for the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Penguins when they played the Islanders Farm Club, just so we could see hockey. And that was right back in 2004, 2005.
Yeah, he's just one of those beloved guys. I think both of these guys are beloved, first off. And I think the longevity has something to do with it, right? It's that, there's been some consistency there. They've built up their personalities, and both of them, while they're on different teams now, then I think their identity would be with. I think they both establish their identities pretty strongly in certain markets. I would say Fleury is a Pittsburgh Penguin in my mind, and Brent Burns will always be a Shark in my mind.
Yep.
But I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree. And look, in this day and age with free agency and the salary cap, it's harder for players to stay with one team for their entire career. But if I had to pick a team to identify those two with, it'd be the Penguins and the Sharks. But that doesn't detract from what they've done for other teams after leaving those teams that they're most associated with.
Yeah, I think so. But, you look at that, they're entering their 21st seasons, and they're the most of any of the active players in the NHL right now. That just seems like it pales in comparison to some of the older guys who were around much, much longer. And so obviously Gordie Howe is the guy that played the longest. Now, in the technical NHL stats, he's tied with Chris Chelios in terms of number of seasons at 26, but we all know those stats don't count the WHL.
Yeah, they don't count the 6 seasons he spent in the WHA with the Houston Aeros and the then New
Yeah,
England
sorry.
Whalers.
I said WHL, but I meant WHA.
Yes. And, if you add, first of all, that means he played 32 professional hockey seasons of Major League Hockey. And if you add
Mhm.
up the 174 goals he scored in the WHA with the 801 he scored in the NHL, he's actually ahead of Wayne Gretzky in all-time goals scored.
Yeah, it is absolutely bonkers how long those guys played. Talking about Chelios as well, and he did it over 4 different teams. Started his career in the early '80s and ended it at the end of the aughts into
Yeah.
2010, and that just seems like more than a lifetime. It feels like 3 generations of hockey players kind
Yeah,
of
it's
in
crazy.
went,
And
right?
yeah, and think about Gordie Howe, started playing in the 40s, played in 5 decades in the NHL, 40s through the 80s. I mean, inclusive. That is unbelievable. I mean, he went from Franklin Roosevelt to Ronald Reagan as far as
Oh
American
my god.
presidents are concerned. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, for a Canadian, who cares? But I guess um, there's something to be said for that. But, you know, beyond Gordie Howe and Chris Chelios, of course, you have Mark Messier, who played 25 seasons, the aforementioned Jaromir Jagr, who of his NHL career had 24 seasons. The most recently retired of the bunch, Joe Thornton and Zdeno Chara, each played 24 seasons. There's a couple other guys in that category, most notably Tim Horton, who unfortunately career was cut short when he died in a car accident. But who knows how much further his career would have gone, and obviously we'll never know. But I think it's really interesting because we haven't seen anyone come close to that 25 or 26 in a while before retiring. And it's you look at these guys. What is it about these guys that allowed them to play this long? Was it the era of hockey that they were in? Was it their fitness? Like, what do you think it was?
I think both of those were factors. I mean, Gordie Howe actually retired for 1 year and then came back.
Yeah.
So, there was that. But I mean, you guys like Gordie Howe and Tim Horton, if you're going back, all the way to those days, Alex Delvecchio with the Red Wings also, those guys really did take care of themselves. And you got to remember at that time, players had off-season jobs. They were not 24/7, 365, I'm training to play hockey kind of a thing. So I think those guys did take things a little bit more seriously when it came to fitness than maybe some of their contemporaries did. And also, I think the fact that the game was a little bit slower back then allowed some older players to continue playing, where now with the speed of the game and the way it's played, it's harder for a 40-something-year-old player to keep up and to maintain the pace. So I think those are some of the factors. But the other thing, you look at those guys, your Chris Chelioses, your Gordie Howes, they were just excellent, and they just kept playing at a very high level for such a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Messier, the same. Zdeno Chara, I think also the same. He kept up for quite some time, and I think he walked away at the right time for
Yeah.
his career. I think, there's wanting to leave on a high, which I think is more acceptable these days in terms of feeling good about walking away at a certain level of play. I think that, it is interesting though, because you look at the kind of counterbalance of what you're saying in terms of the skill and the eras being different and it being slower. But then guys today generally take better care of themselves. There's
Yes.
more attention to nutrition and fitness and wear and tear and all of that. But it's almost been a necessity to do so because of the increased speed and the increased physicality and all of that. And so does that sort of, do they cancel each other out and prevent some of these guys from playing longer?
Maybe. And then there's another thing. You look at this list, Chris Chelios, Mark Messier, Gordie Howe, Tim Horton. These are all guys, Zdeno Chara, they dished out a lot of punishment. They did not shy away from the physicality of the game, but they were more often than not guys who were delivering the punishment. And I think some opponents were a little intimidated as far as, who was going to dare hit Gordie Howe, who was going to dare hit Mark Messier, knowing that both of those guys would, lift their elbows the next time you went into the corner and let you know that they weren't happy about what you just did to them.
That is also true, which adds to, being so impressed that they lasted this long, right?
Yes. A lot of punishment given out and probably taken over those 20 plus years of their NHL careers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're going to talk about the 4 guys who are hitting their 20-year mark in this upcoming season and why and the how of it coming up next. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. We're in full swing for all those summer sports like baseball, soccer, and more. We absolutely miss hockey, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. They have odds for Major League Baseball, the WNBA, soccer, and so much more. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL Prospects podcast. Locked On NHL Prospects provides you with a look at the NHL draft, team prospect evaluations, and so much more. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Gil, earlier in the show, mentioned this great article from the Hockey News. We'll put a link to that in the show notes so you have it yourself. And they're talking about the 4 guys that are hitting their 20-year mark. And it's Ryan Suter, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, and Corey Perry. And, of course, like you look at this list, you got to talk about Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin together because we've been talking about them together for all of eternity. And now it's hitting 20 years. And it's unbelievable because it's been like 20 years since they were drafted, right? So hitting the 20 season mark together just seems right and proper.
It does. And, we talked about that lockout from 2004, 2005. That's what allowed them to start their NHL careers at the same time because there was no season that year. And they have always been, sort of linked together. They've been division rivals and battling each other for scoring leads and trophies and all-star berths and Stanley Cups. And now it's hard to believe, Sidney Crosby's original nickname was Sid the Kid, and that was 20 years ago.
He is an old man now. Still younger than us, but he's an old man.
In hockey years, yes.
Yes, in hockey years. But I think the other interesting aspect is that both of them have remained with their original teams for this entire time. Everybody else we've talked about has eventually gone on elsewhere. For the most part, or played on 4 different teams or whatever. These guys, they are loyal players.
And they're both the faces of their respective franchises, and they're both still playing at a very high level, which is even more impressive. I mean, Ovechkin started.
Both Stanley Cup winners as well.
Both Stanley Cup winners, both future Hall of Famers. Ovechkin started slowly last year, but certainly picked things up as the season went on. And, Crosby still, 94 points in 82 games last year. So he's not showing many signs of slowing down. These guys are literally generational players. And it has been great for hockey fans, whether you're a fan of any of the teams or just a fan of the sport, to watch these two guys play in the NHL and specifically play against each other whenever they went head to head.
Yeah, and I think that's what's been so great about watching their careers is that there's always a buzz when they play head to head. Now, is it partially constructed by the NHL sports media? Sure. But is it still very satisfying? Absolutely. And so I think that, these guys have dealt with being linked together really well, I think, over the course of their careers. And you have to wonder, like, is it possible to live in a world where the two of them don't hang it up at the same time?
It would be fitting if they did. I'll say that much. And you also get the feeling, and I may be way off base with this, but I get the feeling that the two of them have gotten together at some point and laughed about the way the rivalry is depicted in the media at times.
Yeah, I know they did that commercial back in the day.
Yes, yes, they did.
That was very, very funny. Was it like a hotel chain or something
I
like
think
that?
so, yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very funny. But yeah, I just think like, about the guys that are ahead of them on the list that we just talked about, and could either of them get to 25 or 26 seasons? I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Sidney Crosby's entering the last year of his contract. We have to see.
We've been talking about that all summer long. Like,
yes,
is this extension happening?
He's going to re-sign with the Penguins. Everyone seems very confident about that. But for how long? Is it a 3-year deal, a 1-year deal, a 5-year deal? Does he end up, working for the team in a different capacity after he hangs up his skates? A lot of unknowns, but I think we'll know a lot about the potential for Sidney Crosby to reach 24 or 25 seasons, depending on how long this new extension is going to be for.
Yeah, and we know that Ovechkin's under contract through 25-26, so 2 more years left on that deal, which would get him to a 21st season. But again, the way this past season started, like, a lot of us thought he was a goner, but he managed to pull it out like you talked about. So I do think it is possible that he could go another 2-3 years. Obviously, he's going to push for that goal scoring record. But once that happens, it'll be interesting. Like, if it happens, and once that happens, it'll be interesting to see if he hangs it up like immediately thereafter.
Right. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that's sort of the last thing for him to check off of his list, his bucket list for the NHL anyway.
Yeah, so Corey Perry, of course, we do have to talk about the other guys, just signed a 1-year deal to go back to Edmonton this season. He's another guy that was somewhere for very long, but now at the tail end of his career has been a little bit of a journeyman. I'm honestly surprised he's playing another year.
I am too. And yet here's a guy, he wins a Stanley Cup back in 2007. And what has he been in the finals 4 of the last 5 years, but hasn't won?
Hasn't won. So
it's like Corey Perry. The other
there's
thing
something
I like about
to
Corey,
that.
What was that?
There's something to that about just being like in it for the revenge.
Yeah, there is that is certainly motivation. But the other thing is this: Corey Perry in his prime was a top 6 offensive productive guy, and now he is a third or more likely 4th line player who's going to be gritty, who's going to be physical, who's going to check and play defense. And yet he was able to make that transition and still be a useful bottom 6 player on some really good teams that, as we said, have been to the Stanley Cup Finals in 4 of the last 5 years. Not everyone can make that transition as gracefully as Corey Perry. And while it's not going to make the same kind of headlines that a Malkin or a Crosby is going to make, I give him a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely. And I think, as much as he, irks some people around the league, I think that there is a reason, to your point, about why he stuck around this long, because he does have some skills to offer. And, he wouldn't be with Edmonton another year if there wasn't, reason and a role for him to play there. Ryan Suter is going to be with the St. Louis Blues this upcoming season, signed basically a league minimum deal to play there for one more year, right?
He can afford to because two other teams are still paying him for buying
Well,
him
that's
out.
true. That is absolutely true. But yeah, I do wonder like what his role is going to be on that team.
Yeah, he's probably going to be a third pair defenseman, be a mentor to some of the younger guys. I mean, he hasn't missed a game in each of the last 4 seasons, which is
Yeah.
very, very impressive. And, he's durable. He's smart. He's not going to set the world on fire offensively anymore, but he is still a useful piece on any NHL team at this stage in his career. And if he's playing for the league minimum, I think that's a nice player to add for the St. Louis Blues, especially if they're trying to get, some younger players and mentor them at the NHL level.
Absolutely. All right. Well, are there any other guys around the league that will hit the 20 season mark in the upcoming years? We're going to take a look at who's lower on the list and look for that potential. And we will do that coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right. So beyond the 4 that we just talked about that are hitting their 20th season, we look ahead to who else could potentially hit that mark. And the next guys on the list are Jack Johnson, Anze Kopitar, Chris Letang, and Jordan Staal. What do you think about any of them?
Some of these guys I think will make it. Some of these guys though are also slowing down. So
Yeah,
Chris Letang has dealt with some injuries in recent years. Don't know how much longer he's going to want to play. I think Anze Kopitar will probably make the cut.
I think so too.
I mean, he's still playing. I mean, he's not this player he was 10 years ago, but he's still a darn good player and a leader in that locker room. Jack Johnson's been a little, quieter lately. What do you think? Do you think he has a shot at playing another couple of years?
I mean, I think he is a survivor in this league because I
Yep.
feel like every year is the year we think, oh, he's not going to be around for another season. And then he signs with Columbus for another year. And, we'll see what he does with Columbus, but there's always going to be, teams that are lower in the standings that need a veteran defenseman that can provide, a certain level of veteran leadership in limited minutes. And he seems to be that guy for a lot of teams. And I don't get it in a lot of ways, but I also think, there's something to it. He must be bringing something to keep getting these deals, right?
Yeah, he's doing something right. Otherwise, he wouldn't be asked back. So he must be a very good teammate and work well with some of the younger players. And then, how about Evgeny Malkin? Do you think he gets there or do you think he's getting closer to the end?
Well, it is interesting because, there's been some rumors recently that he might play like one more year with the Pens, but then hightail it back to Russia. Don't know what, the outcome of that will be. There was also honestly trade rumors about Chris Letang potentially going to Montreal as well. So with both of those guys, I think that, anything could happen. But you have to think that like 20 years is such a big milestone that they'd want to make the attempt as best as they could.
You would think. You would think. I mean, you would also think that, money is probably not the major motivating factor at this stage in their career. But you don't know that. And, you're trying to leave your mark on history. I think that is sort of the more important thing. And, for some of these guys, winning another Stanley Cup, I know, Anze Kopitar, Evgeny Malkin, these are guys, Chris Letang, would love to win another Stanley Cup after they've already accumulated more than a few along the way.
Yeah, I think so. I think, Jordan Stahl is quietly more likely than any of these guys in some ways. He's under contract through 26, 27. And, that's at age 38. Seems like a good time to hang it up at that point. He may end up, getting bought out for the last couple of years. But I think he'll stick around at least for 2 more years.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and we'll have to see whether or not he gets there. And then, if you're looking at this list, the next goalie who could possibly reach it, Jonathan Quick, but he's still got to play 3 more seasons, including this year, to get to 20.
Yeah, I think that'll be tough, but this year is going to be a huge deciding factor in that. Obviously he had a really good season this past year, almost kind of out of nowhere, but he seems to have turned a corner. And will that continue in this 1-year deal he has with the Rangers? And will that make them want to re-sign him for another year as the backup? Could be. I mean, he and Shesterkin seem to work well together in terms of balancing out the duties and one being able to pick it up when the other one's having a tough run of things for a few games. And it worked well this past season. Who knows how long they could stick it out together.
Yeah, we'll see. And he's playing close to home. He's a Connecticut native, so it certainly could. How about Marc-Edouard Vlasic? Talk to me about Pickles. He needs 1 more year after this season, but he's not.
I don't think so.
Every day.
I know.
Yeah.
That says to me, no, that like, even if he gets in the lineup this year more than half the games, I will be surprised.
Yeah. And if, is there another team that wants him for 1 year for that sort of mentorship role?
Nope.
I don't know. I don't know.
Nope.
It'll be tough for Pickles to make it.
Yeah, I do think, if you go further down in terms of guys who are also further away, I do think Claude Giroux makes the 20-year. He just is so good about keeping himself fit and active and ready to play. And he's so good at faceoffs and is a power play specialist. And even in more limited minutes, I think he has a really good role to play. He loves playing at home in Ottawa. I think he'll officially retire as a Flyer, but I think that he'll play out the next couple of years at least in Ottawa.
He's still productive, so I could see him. He needs 3 more seasons, including this year, to get there. Let's see if he can pull it off.
Yeah, and Drew Doughty, I don't know. He's so broken sometimes.
Yeah.
But I just don't think so.
He's still solid, but he's not in all the time.
No. So it is really interesting. Like, we've looked at all of these guys and just the longevity seems to be going a little down over the years, and, coming up with other guys that you think will make it to 20 years. Like, will Connor McDavid make it to 20 years in the NHL?
Yeah, that's a good question. Got a long way to go, but we'll see. We'll see. You know what? Whether he makes it or not, it'll be fun watching him every step of the way.
Absolutely. All right. That will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Gil will be back on Monday's show talking to a few hosts from around the Locked On NHL network about what's going on with their teams. And we will be back next Friday as we creep closer to the beginning of the new NHL season. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league like this one. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great weekend, everyone.